Hi, and thank you everyone for attending. Welcome to today's webinar, Tips and Techniques for Testing APIs and Services in the Cloud. I'm Jeff Peoples, the Senior Product Manager for the Enterprise Continuous Quality Solutions here at Parasoft. Companies are being driven to deliver high-quality applications, which in turn is driving the need for them to innovate in order to deliver a compelling customer experience. How can they validate the customer experience, you ask? Well, first we test that it works, and then that we test that it still works. With disruption in nearly every market, competition has significantly increased. This pushes companies to add new features and capabilities to gain and retain their market share. The increase in these offerings means that customers can make a switch to another vendor faster and cheaper than in the past. So providing a strong customer experience is crucial to a company's business success. To deliver new capabilities and complete application testing in a timely manner, you need to have a CI/CD pipeline that incorporates CT, or continuous testing, the level up from test automation alone. And one key component for accomplishing this is API testing. Focusing more of your testing on automated API tests. Now, I'm not saying that UI testing isn't important. You absolutely need UI testing. And Selenium is the de facto standard for testing in a browser. And to help with that, Parasoft offers Selenic. Not only can it help to lighten the Selenium maintenance burden, it can capture the API traffic of those tests and generate API tests from those recordings. So what then are some pros and cons of automated API testing? The pros. With API testing, you have an end-to-end maintainable automated scenario that you can replicate over and over. And if you implement it into your CI process, you can begin smoke testing APIs upon code check-in. You have an established communication channel between your developers and DevOps QA testers, which leads to a reduced time between the time code is checked in and how quickly any bugs can be diagnosed and then fed back to development, shifting that interval closer to the developer, leaving more time to repair the problem and potentially mitigate against last-minute fire drills. So, how about the cons? We find that teams often have a knowledge issue of how to properly test the APIs or how they're implemented and used. Often, a specialized skill set is required to conduct the testing and ensure API coverage. And API testing often kind of falls in this no man's land of, was this supposed to be tested by the API dev team or the UI team? The bottom line here is that while API testing is indeed ideal for functional testing, there are some technical factors that create barriers to that optimization, such as what I'm calling the ABCDs of test environment destabilizers. A, for accessibility. The backend asset or service that you may require for your testing simply may not be available. There could be connection issues or company policies that require back-end resources to be conserved, in which case the resources you need for testing may not necessarily be accessible to you when you need them. B for behavior. The resource that you may require may not be in the state you need it in at the appropriate time. It could be in a wait state or potentially processing large amounts of data, causing you to have to wait yourself or change your test plan to accommodate these types of behaviors. C for cost. Running dependent systems in test environments can also be costly. Companies may have policies against costly resources being established in a testing environment. D for data. And then data is also an issue where production data has to be duplicated into a test environment or traffic has to be simulated, and then there's the issue of privacy and PII with that data, so test data must be generated. And depending on the size of your data set, this could be hugely time and resource consuming. And service virtualization is the answer to those ABCDs of stabilizers. Another common term for service virtualization is creating a digital twin of your application. And Parasoft Virtualize has you covered. Let me emphasize 4 critical areas that are essential for a successful testing environment. The first is the virtual service or digital twin has the same behavior and logic as quickly as possible to maintain domain knowledge of that service. We want to rapidly create that service. Next, we have the breadth of technology. Services can be like snowflakes in that, for instance, they're all water, but every one of them is different. So having the right combinations of technology is important. A broadly accessible architecture. Different users will want different levels of access. For example, the community of practice may want ad hoc level, where the center of excellence may require fully scalable environments. In some cases, you would need to accommodate both of those in the same infrastructure. And lastly, we have change management. Initiatives may tend to fall apart. Although they do a great job of creating services initially, they may not have a process of upgrading or maintaining these services and data. And moving into the area of DevOps, it also allows us to take a more environment-based approach to testing. This here is our continuous testing platform, or CTP, where you can graphically define your specific topology in a model that you can then save configuration instances that are combinations of on, off, live, or virtual, and then toggle between those live or virtual assets for your particular testing scenario. The problem shifts to those back-end or dependent resources that our applications have to be able to access in order to complete their tasks that we're trying to test. Resources that are needed may become unavailable or have associated costs that discourage diligent testing. You may not be able to control the behavior of that asset, as would be the case with the centralized shared database. Or perhaps you're having to wait on another team to complete their piece of the puzzle before testing your part can begin. It could be any number of reasons. Even maybe your particular organization is structured in a way that load or performance testing is reserved for a specific group external to yours, and you have to wait for them before you can declare testing complete. And a lot of these are really test data challenges. But wouldn't it be great to know your application can continue to roll past these, or that your part is resilient and fully capable before it moves on to a downstream testing? The next step would be to integrate all of this into an overall CI/CD pipeline where this containerized environment that has all these test cases, virtual services, test data, and all the different configurations we require can be deployed as a function of code check-in and orchestrated with container services such as Docker and Kubernetes, potentially on-premise or in the cloud, to allow us to incorporate this anytime, anywhere testing that has all of the right behavior that we need. And the end goal here is to be able to control this more holistically. And then we're able to get better test results, because that's the real objective at the end of the day. So we've come to our demonstration. So let me just switch my screen here. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to come to our SOAVirt, and we want to be sure that our SOATest virtualized server is running. You just come over here to where this server has a gray dot by it, and that shows that the server is not running. So we want to highlight that server and we want to hit that play button. And that's going to activate our server and bring it online. And so we see here that it's got a green light, and so we are ready to begin. So the next thing I want to do is I want to come to my demo app. Now, our demo app here is an internal application that we've developed in-house that will be acting as our example application under test. So the first thing I want to do, though, before we begin, is bring your attention to this little Parasoft icon up here in the corner. And if I were to click that and drop it down, what we see is that this is our Parasoft Recorder plugin for Chrome. And we see here we have the ability to record UI actions in order to generate Selenium tests using Selenic, or we can record API traffic for generating API tests using SOATest. And so that's the option I have selected. And now I just want to hit start recording. And so once the recording begins, we're ready to begin our test. So the first thing I want to do is I want to log in as purchaser. And our demo application is our online store for camping and recreational equipment. So for this example, let's say that we want to buy a backpack. First thing we want to do for our camping trip, buy a backpack. I'll add one, and then we'll go to home. And then let's add 2 green sleeping bags. 1, 2. And then back to home. And we'll add a tent. So cozy 3-person tent for a 2-person camping trip. We want one of those. And so now we see everything's added to cart successfully. We'll go to our cart and check that out. That's our order. 1 3-person tent, 2 green sleeping bags, and 1 backpack to carry everything. So we'll proceed to submission. And now I want to select which store I want to ship this to. So I'm going to ship to store number 1. And John Smith is going to receive it. I'll get the store location there and assign the invoice. I'll assign the invoice number 1234. I'll assign our employee number 3456. And then go to review. And it shows us our order here, and we look at it and everything looks good. This is the location 1 that it's going to go to, so that's the store I would pick up our order at. So we want to submit that for approval, and now that order has to be approved by a higher authority before it gets shipped. So that's all that we want to do, so we're going to sign out it there. And now we'll stop our recorder. And when we click stop recording, it's going to prompt us for what we want to save our recorded API traffic as. And so I'm going to call that Paracamp demo. And I have the ability here, I can associate a requirement and give it a work item ID that's in our Jira system, and then create that test asset. And now whenever I hit this button, watch what happens up here with our Parasoft icon. What it's doing is communicating with that server that we established using our Smart API test generator. And we see that everything generated properly here. So we'll close that. And now we can go back to SOATest. And now, if we were to come over here, this wasn't here before, and if we drop it down, there is our Paracamp demo test, where we see we're adding the various items to the cart, we're getting our cart items and reviewing our order, etc., and assigning our location, etc. So now what I wanted to show you is that we then have the ability to take that recording and create a virtual asset from that recording. And so this is the first way to do it, and then I'll show you another way using the CTP quick actions. So I'll come over here, and what I want to do is I want to go into Parasoft Virtualize. So if I come over here and I want to right click my virtual assets and I say add new, and a virtual asset PVA file. We want to give it a name, so we'll call it Paracamp asset. Click next. And the type of message that we want to generate are parameterized messages. Next. And now we have the ability here where we can give it the recording from our demo. And so just select that from our recorded traffic directory, open it. And then we have the ability throughout this dialog, it has all kinds of settings and configurations, and you can save those into what we call a traffic template. You can save all those configurations and then apply them by just going to your workspace and then applying that demo app traffic template. So we'll click OK. And now we'll click Next. And after we've set up that traffic template, it's simply, we click Next, and it's going through that traffic template and those recordings and determining all of the responders that it's going to create. Okay, and now this is where we specify our data repository settings. We'll I'm not running a data repository server, so I'll just use the embedded one. Click Next. And then next again, we'll just take all those defaults. And then it's telling us what it's going to create. We say, okay. So what it took to create that virtual asset was just to take our recording file, apply it, and then apply our traffic template. And then it generated all this with simply next, next, and okay. And then we'll just finish taking the defaults there too. And there we have our virtual server created. So we can look here now and we see our Paracamp asset. So if we were to drop that down, and we see these are the responders that it created. So now we have all the pieces necessary to go back to SOATest, and we can run our test. So we right click here and run our test. And so everything succeeded and everything's great. Now, right now, we're not pointing at that virtual asset that we created. We're pointed at the original. So we can tell that by just dropping down our server here and message proxies. And if we were to double click this, we see here that we're using localhost 8080 v1. And so what I'd like to show you is that if we come back to our demo app and we log in as approver this time, we see that it's now been run twice, because once when I did the original recording and once when I just ran that test. Each time I run the test, it's going to create a new order here in our approvals section. But that's not really what we want. What we want is to use the virtual asset that we created. And so we would just come over to our virtual assets on the right here, drop that down, and here's our Paracamp asset. So I'll just double click that. This is the endpoint that our virtual asset is running on. So we'll just make note of this, proxy v1, and then we'll come back to our proxy, which is here, which we have right here, and double click. And instead right now, where it's going to the live asset, we want to tell it instead to go to our virtual asset, which was 9080 proxy v1. And that is all that it would take. So I'm going to close that, Well, I'll save it first. Save, and then close that. And so now when I rerun my tests, if I refresh, we see that no orders exist. We can now rerun this test as many times as we like, and everything processes successfully. Meanwhile, back in our online store, no matter how many times I come over here and refresh or run that test, it's no longer creating incrementing orders because now we're hitting that virtual asset. So, just to review, the steps we took after we brought our SoAvert server up and running is that we first started our Parasoft recorder. We then went through the steps of our tests in our online store. We stopped the recorder and we generated our API tests using our Smart API test generator. We then used that same recording to generate a virtual asset. I then demonstrated our online store incrementing orders while we pointed to the online or pass-through version of the app. And then I demonstrated changing our proxy to then point to our virtual asset so that no more orders would accumulate and we could successfully run our tests. That is the standard process for creating a virtual asset and using a proxy to switch between a live and a virtual asset using SoATest Virtualize. Now, I'd like to show you the same process using CTP. So I'll just switch to CTP here. And this is the landing page of CTP. And so the first thing I want to draw your attention to is servers online. And that's right now where it's saying that SoAvert server that we created, it's indicating that it is online. So the first thing I'd like to show you is sort of a conceptual diagram of what it is that we did earlier. So we had our SoATest executor, or we had our web browser hitting our demo application. And that application was then referencing a back-end web service. We imposed a proxy in between there that then said, whenever we are in a pass-through mode, we want it to pass through our proxy and go straight to our web back-end service. But if we then switched it to our virtual asset, we want any requests to go through our proxy and instead go to our virtualization. Now, when we're creating this actual online document, it's not really necessary to get this complex. This was just to demonstrate. So really all you need is the server that is your demo application, a proxy that then has instances that can say either a live or a virtual asset, and then you need your web service in the back end. This is a more complex image, even though it's very simple. So I want to go back to my workspace, back to my landing page, and the first thing I'm going to do is see where this quick actions is. I'm going to click this red button right here. And what it's going to do is it's going to generate for you that diagram that I just mentioned. And the pass-through is already in place. So whenever we click endpoints, we just have to tell it to slightly modify this. It thinks it's localhost 9080 admin, where it's actually just localhost 8080 v1. And so we just have to update that and change that one. But then we want instead for it to point to our virtual asset. And so this is how we do that. We come to our admin system and then the sub environment, and then we select edit diagram. And we're going to come to this pass through and we're going to select here and we're going to say edit that instance. And right now it's pointing at localhost 9080 admin. So we want that pass through to point to 8080 v1. So that's all we need to do for our pass-through or our live asset. So we'll finish that. And then we want to come here to our message proxy and drop this down and say start recording. And so now we're recording within CTP and not from our Parasoft recorder. So we can just quickly go back through the steps of our test where we sign in, and this time I'll go through it a little faster. Purchaser, what I'm doing. So backpack, one backpack. Two sleeping bags. And a tent. Sometimes it's just easier just to recreate the stuff, especially whenever it's going to do what I'm showing you. So we've got that. So we're good. We'll select store one. We'll let John Smith pick it up. Get John's location. Assign an invoice number and the employee number. And we'll go to the review and submit. Okay, so now that we're done with that, we can say sign out, and we're done recreating our test with the new recorder. So we've done the same test, but we've created a new recording file. So now we can just tell it to stop. So we'll tell it stop recording, and it's going to immediately prompt us and say, hey, would you like me to create a virtual asset from that recording that you just did? And so you say, create one now. And it's going to go through the process. Let's change this one now, and we'll call it virtual. And so this is what the virtual asset will be called. And so everything's good. We will say finish. And now we see it has created our message proxy instance virtual. So let me show you one more thing. If I come over to here, and what this is this enables me to add SOA test as an element to my diagram. So right here, I need to save that first. And then that enables me to be able to create a new instance. So I'll just name it Paracamp Demo. And I have the ability to add my test scenarios from SOA test that I've already created. So, and here down at the bottom, we have Paracamp Demo, which was that API test that we created earlier. So I'll click add there and click finish. And now we have our Paracamp Demo. And we don't want pass-through, we want our virtual. And so let's provision that and see what we get. So it's now running that API test that we created from our recording earlier through our virtual message proxy instance. Okay, great. So now we see it completed successfully. So let me show you one thing that makes it even easier. So, okay, so we've got our demo virtual here. So we can come over here, drop this down, and we can say create a new instance. And sometimes these diagrams can get quite complex, and you have all these combinations of virtual and pass-through. And so you have the ability to save these instances into little configurations, and so what we call environment instances. So we can save that configuration. We'll call this one virtual. And click OK. And then we'll change this to pass-through. And we'll provision that. And now this is going against the live asset. So we see that our virtual passed and our live passed. So we'll close that, and then we'll provision an instance of that too. So we'll say create a new instance, and then we're basically just saving this configuration. So we'll call this pass-through. And then we click OK. And the reason why we do this is that now we have these instances and we don't even have to come into the diagram anymore. So we can just close this. So I can just click on this system now and select the instance. If I want to run the test as a virtual, I would run it here. So just makes it easier to flip between the two configurations or however many configurations you create for yourself. Moving on. Now I'd like to take you through the final piece, which is our test data management and using regular expressions as data. In order to demonstrate this next scenario, I need to switch to another instance of CTP where you see a much more involved diagram here. This is an advanced scenario that requires some previous setup as well as a more advanced demo application other than our simple online store. Namely, this is Parabank, our other Parasoft developed demo application. But it's such a useful aspect of our test data management tool that I want to show you that I just had to share it with you here. And it involves our test data management tool where once we've virtualized the live asset and created its digital twin, we are then also virtualizing the data. I did a previous webinar that goes into detail about test data management. If you'd like to review that one, I'd recommend searching BrightTalk for keywords Parasoft Test Data, and it'll be right there. So for this example, we're going to be working with the loan processor functionality of this model. And when we design our CTP diagrams, we're able to section off just the key elements that we need. And here, these are called silos. Now, I can drop down this select instances field and we can see some of those environment instances like the ones we defined in the last part of our demo. And these particularly are set up to configure specific behaviors from our loan processor. For instance, we have positive, which means any request for a loan sent to the loan processor will return a positive, loan approved. Negative, of course, any loan is rejected. But the one we want to select is data driven. And then we want to provision that. There, and we see we have our green check mark, and so we're ready to begin our data-driven loan processor. We're going to go to Parabank, and we're going to apply for a loan here. And so let's say that I want a $10,000 loan, and I'm willing to put down $500. And so if I click Apply Now, it says, I don't have sufficient funds for the given down payment. So let's go back to request a loan. And then I want that same $10,000 loan, but I'm going to put down 20%. So I'm going to put down 2,000. And so if I click apply for that loan, I say, congratulations, the loan has been approved by this 10K loan is approved by 20% down. And so I want another loan. And let's say that I want to apply for a $10,000 loan and I want to put down 2,500. And then I'll apply. Okay, so here we have an internal error has occurred and been logged. Okay, and the reason why, if we go to our test data here has only scenarios for a $10,000 loan and either $2,000 down or $500 down. And if we drop this down, we can see each of those scenarios in detail. So we see that if someone puts down exactly $500 on a $10,000 loan, that the approval will be false. And so if they put down exactly $2,000 on a $10,000 loan, then this rule will be invoked and the approval will be true. Now the point is that currently the way that the database is configured, it can only handle the scenarios for which it has data. And so this is the magic that I'm wanting to show you, is that I can copy this row. It's easier just to duplicate the row and then change the data. So we see here's the data for this particular row. And this is the piece that I wanted to share with you. I can actually say, I have to edit it here, and then these become editable fields. And I can say that anything greater than $2,000, and I have to put that in square brackets, for any amount of loan, let's say. It doesn't even have to be $10,000 anymore. As long as I put down more than $2,000, then that loan will be approved. And so I'll just change this. We'll say any loan approved with greater than $2,000 down. And so this is our new rule. But see how before we were using data, and now we're using what are called regular expressions, which an easy way to describe a regular expression, and I recommend you Googling it if you're not familiar with it, but it's essentially a formula to resolve a value. And so here we're changing from a data point, a data value of say 500 or from 2000 to a range of values, anything greater than 2000. And here I can say the loan can be anything, square brackets with a star between them, with an asterisk. And then we want to say that that is true. And so now I can just save that. And okay, it's updated and we're good. So I can come over to here now and go back to my request a loan. And I'm going to ask for my $10,000 and my $2,000 pay, $2,000 down. Apply. And so it has been approved according to the 10K loan approved with 20% down. So I'm going to go back and request that loan now. This time I'm going to request that $10,000 loan with the 2,500, like we tried when it failed before, and apply. And now my loan has been approved because of this new data rule that I've implemented. And so how can you use this in your applications? Because we're using regular expressions inside data fields, and that is so tremendously powerful. And whenever you can implement a regular expression inside a data field, and what's so fascinating also about this test data management is that this is essentially what we call a data source. It is essentially a data source created from a query. And so you are actually updating the query result and still getting all of this valuable usage of the data. And so that's what I wanted to show you. That is actually our final piece. So let's review. Reviewing what we went over prior to the demo, we touched on what a testing environment needs to move from automated to continuous testing. It needs to be available, scalable, and controllable. And we touched on what causes these test environments to break down, those ABCDs of test environment destabilizers. We talked about how service virtualization is the answer to those ABCDs of stabilizers. And by meeting those 4 key objectives of rapid service creation, breadth of technology, broadly accessible architecture, and change management. Then I demonstrated for you how virtualize and CTP can be used in some ways in tandem and in others in place of to simplify certain tasks like recording and creating virtual assets. We looked at how we could use CTP's test data management and regular expressions inside the actual data to leverage really powerful capabilities where simple standard test data would otherwise fall short. And how CTP helps you graphically and visually manage your testing environments to move from simply automated testing to continuous testing. And so what were those steps again? We have two methods. And the first method is using our Parasoft Recorder Chrome plugin plus SOATest plus Virtualize. And what we did is that we started our Parasoft Recorder using the Chrome plugin. We ran through our test, and then we stopped the recorder and we told Smart API to generate those API tests in SOATest. And then we created a virtual asset from that same recording. And then I demonstrated one run of the test using the live asset and then one run of the test using the virtual asset. The second method is using CTP, in which we used a quick action, that red button on the very front page, to generate the diagram. We then started Parasoft Recorder via CTP from that diagram, and we ran through our tests like we did before, and then we stopped the recorder, and it prompted us immediately, do you want to create your virtual asset from that? And so we clicked Create Now, and just a couple of key-ins, and we named it and generated our virtual asset from there. And then I showed you how to add a SOATest element to your diagram and then configure and run your tests from CTP. So those are the two ways. If you prefer to do things, if you're a graphical, visual thinker, perhaps you'd like to use the CTP method. Or you always have the standard process with Chrome plugins, SOATest and Virtualize. So that comes to the end of our demo. So if you're looking for more resources, contact Parasoft, or if you're ready to try Virtualize yourself, you can download the free community edition. If you're interested in taking the next step on your testing journey to explore APIs and service testing, be sure to watch the webinar replay. Stop waiting, keep testing with virtual test data. I referenced that particular webinar in the demo, and if you want, here's the link for it as well. Parasoft continues to augment our software testing platform with AI and additional capabilities. Learn more in our solution brochure or go to our website to access blogs, white papers, and other useful resources, and contact us with any questions. Have a great day.